You're listening to Night Dreams Radio with Gary Anderson.
And here I am. I hope everybody's having a great day. I know I am. And tonight, UFOs. We're going to have somebody on here who I think you're going to be really surprised about. And we're going to be talking for the next 2 hours about UFOs. So why don't you go get yourself a cup of Java, go pull up the easy chair, go get a comforter, or even a dark beer and sit back and, listen to our show. It's going to be a great, awesome show tonight. And here he is. Are you there?
Yeah, hi. Hi, Gary. Yeah.
Well,
Chad,
hi.
Chad C. Meek here. Yeah.
Okay, well, why don't you introduce yourself and all about you before we get in talking about my favorite subject. No, not about sex, UFOs.
Well, actually, I think sex is I'm involved in UFOs, but my favorite subject is sex, but we'll do UFOs tonight.
Okay.
And maybe sex another night.
Okay. That sounds cool.
Okay. My name is Chad C. Meek. I am the writer and director and author of what we call the greatest UFO story never told, which is Giant Rock, which is actually about a place out in the middle of the Mojave Desert called Giant Rock. And how I got there was by induction. I was actually born into a family of UFO leaders and enthusiasts and experiencers, one of which was a man named George Van Tassel, who was the leader right after the Roswell incident of the worldwide UFO contactee movement. And incidentally, they held huge conventions out in the middle of nowhere. But I grew up and I had a first-eye view of all of this incredible events that occurred out at this very remote place. My background is, for 25 years, I've ran oil and gas companies, international exploration, have made a lot of money, made a lot of friends around the world. I've owned gold mines up in Alaska. I've done quite a few things in the investment banking world. So I'm not completely delusional about what I'm about to share with your audience about the events that occurred at Giant Rock. And incidentally, I hid from this subject matter most of my life for fear of losing, I guess, somewhat credibility when you're dealing with finance and business and things like that. But things have dramatically changed for the world as far as with more and more disclosure coming out about UFOs and the various particulars of this whole thing, which I've been around for all my life. Wasn't up till about a few years ago where I came out, so to speak, and said, hey, I've never denied any of my experiences, but I never came out publicly, never had any reason to, and until in fact, a neighbor of mine who on the beach asked me to write a screenplay about some of my experiences about Giant Rock and my uncle and growing up. So that's kind of what got me in this different mode of a writer, and I had never done anything like this before, but I'm a serial entrepreneur, and it's never stopped me from doing anything or trying anything at least once. So anyway, that's a brief snapshot. On a personal level, I've been married to the same woman, knock on wood, for the last 38 years. Have very successful children, and have had a very good life. But this subject matter, specifically Giant Rock, is a story of a crossroads where literally the who's who of everyone that you would have bumped into the news, including Howard Hughes. You would another person that some of your audience may know, Jack Parsons, who is the founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And another guy, the head of Scientology, the crazy guy. There's a cast of characters that are involved in this thing here. So, anyways, yeah. I summed it up in a verse. Actually, I wrote the screenplay, and then I condensed the screenplay and the sequel into a book called Giant Rock, which this is if anyone's interested in reading the book, they can get it at Amazon. And they say it's had some very, very good reviews, and it reads very, very quickly. So the status right now is we have a large presence. We're looking for deals with either Netflix or possibly a feature film to do the thing there. But that's me in a brief snapshot
wow.
of yeah.
So how old were you when you actually started getting involved in, UFOs and being interested? I mean, having your father involved into it, it would draw you into it.
Oh gosh, it was something. It was an amazing experience. I was actually, and I make no bones about it, I was actually abducted when I was 4 years old, and people asked me, well, how can you remember back then? There are certain things in your life that you don't forget. And actually, I was physically abducted by the referred to as the Greys, which is and I was teleported through a glass window, brought up to a ship that was about 50 feet outside my grandmother's house, and they actually did experiments on me, medical experience, evaluations, and things like that, and telepathically gave me very, very interesting dialogue. One of which was that I would never remember the event, which wasn't true, and the other was that I would have no harm, which also was not true either, because the next day after I had woke up, placed back into my bed at my grandmother's house, I had a very extremely high temperature that made me forced me to go to the doctor, and I couldn't speak a clean sentence for about 6 months. I was continually stuttering so badly,
Oh, wow.
profusely. So I actually had some physical stuff happen. But, and since then, I've done a tremendous amount of research. Like, for instance, John Mack, Dr. John Mack out of Harvard, some of his research that he had come out with, and he was a Pulitzer Prize winner on his work. He claims that there might have been as many as 2 million people abducted between the 1955 and 1965.
Oh, wow.
And so it's considerable amount of that, and more of us are kind of coming out, or some are remembering, when these traumatic events occur to you. And incidentally, they didn't stop at 4. They actually occurred till the age of 10, and then they stopped, and they were finished with whatever they were doing. So I had many hours of missing time, extraordinarily strange events, like my my brothers and sisters would come up missing, and would find them in abandoned houses and things like that, miles away. So there was a whole litany of things that occurred. My uncle, who was the guru of all this stuff going on out at Giant Rock, he was Howard Hughes's right-hand man. He was a flight engineer for Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes used to fly out, to Giant Rock. There's actually a dry lake adjacent to this. I keep saying Giant Rock, and it really is. It's a 10.5-story rock that a man named Frank Kreitzer came out there with a vision and a dream in the 30s, and carved it out on the inside, and actually created a whole very livable place to live. And he had lived there for about 11 years until his death in 1941. But my uncle actually had backed him in the endeavor of going out there. And that's essentially what the story began, is when Frank Kreitzer came to my uncle's gas station in Santa Monica, California, and had no money, and had a bad transmission, and had a great story about a dream and vision he had about this great stone out in the middle of the desert. And so, as it turns out, my Uncle George, in the 1930s, young man, impressionable, gave him $31 and fixed his car for free.
Well, don't forget, back in that time, $31 was a lot more than $31 today. I'll tell you that. I mean, people worked a month almost for that.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, it was a huge sacrifice for him, and also gave him tools, picks, and shovels and canned goods, and all these things were very, very precious. So the story must have been quite compelling for my uncle to actually back him.
Uh-huh.
And then the deal was that Frank Kreitzer would split anything he found out in the desert, any kind of mineral vis-a-vis mining or treasure or whatever. And then my uncle, about a day later, he says, I think I just got suckered into this thing. He said, that guy's never going to come back again.
Oh, wow.
And but that didn't happen. Actually, the guy had staked a tremendous amount of claims out there and had contacted him, and then they became friends. But it turns out this Frank Kreitzer fellow was a follower of Nikola Tesla, and actually it was corresponding with Nikola Tesla, and some other very interesting characters, Dr. Rudolf Steiner, and this whole movement. And so he was really kind of a master metaphysician. And so they later referred to all the ranchers out there and used to refer to him as Crazy Kreitzer, because he would claim that he would be talking to UFOs and spaceships and aliens out there. And so at any rate, there's obviously the story. I think some of your audience will probably understand it. It's quite colorful. There's a lot of colorful people out here, and a lot of colorful events. So anyways, during the war years, in 1941, Frank Kreitzer became a little bit of a menace, but he was able to do things amazing. He was able to grow vegetables, and he was able to live out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, wow! I just can't. It's all those things just to fall in place one right after another.
Yes. And so, anyways, he also had a shortwave radio, and he spoke in broken German. And of course, during the 40s, and there was another story that he had stolen some dynamite. And anyways, he was all hunched in down inside the rock, which incidentally, you can go on the internet and actually see it. You can see, Giant Rock and Frank Kreitzer. You can actually see where he was living. It was really quite comfortable. But he had this big old train door that it was impenetrable, that you could not get inside of there. And so the cops came out to question him about his, speaking in German during the war on a shortwave radio. Which
they probably thought he was a spy.
Right. They thought he was a spy, and then he had reportedly stolen some dynamite, which we don't know was true or not. It could have been. And so they came out and they said, "Come on out." And so what happened is, But anyways, what had happened